Every day for over 2 decades, a quiet old man sat alone on the same weathered bench in the city park, rain or shine, summer or snow. He never missed a day. He came at the same time, wore the same gray coat, and always carried the same brown leather bag. Some joggers started calling him Bench Grandpa, while parents walking their kids simply nodded at him like he was part of the scenery. Nobody really knew him. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then his answers were brief. But he wasn't just some lonely old man with nothing better to do. No, he was guarding a secret, one that would remain hidden until a total stranger sat down next to him, and the journal was found. Hey, don't scroll. Seriously, I know you've got tons of videos you could be watching right now. But if you've ever felt like there's more to a place, a person, or a moment than meets the eye, if you've ever had that gut feeling that something's just waiting to be uncovered, then you're exactly who this story is meant for. You clicked on this because you sensed something, that this wasn't just another random video. And let me promise you, this is not your average story time. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this man sat on that bench every single day. You'll find out what was hidden in that journal and why it left a stranger shaken and speechless. You'll get the answer you came here looking for, and it's not just surprising. It's unforgettable. But before we get there, I want you to think about something. Have you ever watched someone from a distance, on a bus, in a cafe, maybe even in a park, and felt like they were carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories? Like, if you just sat down and listened, you'd uncover something powerful? That's the psychological grip of this story. Because it's not just about an old man and a bench. It's about memory, loss, and how the past has a way of catching up to us in the most unexpected ways. It's about how one stranger, just like you or me, stumbled upon something so personal, so haunting, that it rewrote their understanding of a quiet life they never paid attention to until it was almost too late. Now, let's slow down for a second. This is the kind of story where every detail matters. The kind where you'll want to listen carefully, not because I'm trying to be cryptic, but because everything you're about to hear has a purpose. And yeah, there's mystery. There's emotion. There are moments that might make you pause, maybe even question how much we all walk past without noticing. But that's why I'm telling it this way, to make sure you don't miss a thing. Picture this: a foggy autumn morning. The kind where the mist wraps around tree trunks and you can see your breath in the air. The bench is there as always. And so is he, worn hands resting on the handle of his cane, bag by his feet, eyes staring at something that isn't physically in front of him. Maybe he's watching the trees. Maybe he's seeing something, someone only he can see. People pass him by and life keeps moving. But he's still, constant, like a living ghost of the park itself. Nobody asks why. Until one day someone does. A woman mid-30s, visiting the city for the first time. She notices him. Not just sees him, but really notices him. And when she returns the next day and the next, and finds him missing, what she discovers in his absence sets everything in motion. Now, I know you're thinking, okay, but what's in the journal? And trust me, we'll get there. The journal is the heartbeat of this entire mystery. It doesn't just reveal who he was, it reveals why he stayed, what he was hoping to find, and the tragedy that tied him to that bench for so many years. But this story isn't just about the contents of a notebook. It's about the ripple effect of choices, memories, and one final message he was trying to send. And no, this isn't fiction. Not entirely. What you're about to hear is based on true events, though some details have been changed for privacy. And the emotional truth? That's very real. Let me be clear. You won't find the story in the news. You won't stumble across it in a TikTok scroll or a trending Reddit thread, even though it deserves to be there. That's why I'm telling it here. Because stories like these, the quiet ones, the human ones, the ones that sneak up on you and leave you thinking for days, they deserve a voice. They deserve to be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, they help us see the people around us a little differently. So, who was the old man on the bench? Why did he keep coming back, day after day, even when no one else noticed? What truth was he holding onto so tightly that he couldn't let go, even at the end? And why did a complete stranger, a woman with no connection to him, feel compelled to follow the trail he left behind. Stay with me, because once the pieces start coming together, you'll see the full picture. And it's not what you think. The themes here, grief, forgiveness, memory, even fate, are going to hit different once you know the whole story. And yeah, I'm talking to you, the one still watching this. You're going to want to stick around. Because this isn't just about uncovering the past. It's about understanding how the smallest act, a daily visit to a park bench, can echo through time and touch a life in ways you'd never expect. We'll meet the stranger who found the journal. We'll read her reactions, her confusion, her disbelief. We'll look inside that journal together. You'll hear the entries. You'll hear his voice. And when we get to the last page, when you finally see what he wrote just days before he disappeared, you'll understand exactly why this story had to be told. But not yet. Because right now, we're still on that bench. Still watching from the outside. Still trying to figure out what brought him there and what it was he never stopped waiting for. And just when you think you've got it figured out, that's when everything changes. People always assumed he was just another retiree with nowhere better to be. But that assumption came from a place of comfort. It's easier to believe someone is simply lonely than to wonder what they might be hiding. In truth, the man on the bench, his name was Walter, had once lived a life filled with purpose. He had been a high school history teacher in the very city where he now spent his days in quiet reflection. Some of his former students, now grown with families of their own, would occasionally pass by him on their morning runs or afternoon strolls. A few even recognized him. One or two gave a polite wave, maybe a nostalgic smile. But none of them stopped to talk. Because what do you say to a man whose entire presence feels like he's waiting for something or someone that never came? But Walter's life hadn't always been still. Just 10 years earlier, he was living in a modest apartment across town with his wife, Eleanor. They were that kind of couple you rarely see anymore, the kind that still held hands at the grocery store, still left handwritten notes on the kitchen counter. But Eleanor had a habit of vanishing into silence when her memories slipped away. Alzheimer's is cruel like that. It doesn't just erase names and faces. It erases the life you built, brick by brick, leaving only fragments behind. For years, Walter cared for her without complaint, and every afternoon he would take her on a walk through the park, guiding her gently to the bench. That bench. It had become a marker of routine. Familiar. Safe. A place where time slowed down long enough for Eleanor to smile and, just for a moment, remember who she was. After she passed, neighbors said Walter didn't cry much. He didn't fall apart. He simply changed. He sold the apartment and moved into a small unit not far from the park, barely touched the savings he and Eleanor had built over the years. But he returned to the bench every day. Same time. Same coat. Same silence. It became a ritual, one that even the city squirrels began to anticipate. But what nobody knew, not even the mailman who occasionally tipped his cap at Walter, was that inside the brown leather bag he always carried was a journal. And it wasn't just any notebook filled with ramblings. It was a chronological record of his visits. Names. Dates. Sketches. Even clippings from old newspapers. Some pages were scrawled in shaky handwriting, others written with unsettling precision, like he was trying to send a coded message only someone specific would understand. A message meant for a ghost, or for someone else entirely. The woman who found the journal, her name was Sarah, wasn't looking for answers. She was just passing through town, visiting a cousin who lived nearby. She had never seen Walter before, but on the day she noticed the empty bench and the bag left behind, something made her stop. She didn't mean to open it, at least not at first. But there was no name, no ID, just the journal, and the feeling that someone had left it there on purpose. Almost like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to something no one was supposed to find. Sarah started reading out of curiosity, but within minutes, she realized this wasn't just an old man's musings. This was something else. A map, maybe. A confession. Or a warning. And the deeper she read, the less sure she became. There were entries about a man named Clifford, someone Walter seemed to watch from a distance. He never described him directly, only referred to him in phrases like the one who doesn't belong and the visitor. At first, it sounded like paranoia. But then there were entries that matched actual events. Missing persons reports from the local paper, strange accidents in the area that had no clear explanation. It was as if Walter had been cataloging everything, quietly tracking the patterns nobody else saw. Sarah kept flipping through the journal, page after page, heart racing, unsure if she was reading the thoughts of a grieving husband or something darker. Because what if Walter hadn't been just watching? What if he had been waiting for someone to return? Not Eleanor, but Clifford. Here's where things get complicated. According to city records, Walter had never filed a report. No complaints. No police contact. Nothing official to suggest foul play. But the journal tells a different story. One page mentions a boy, unnamed, who had disappeared near the park playground in 2003. Another page contains a series of numbers that resemble phone records, many of them with local area codes. And tucked into the back cover was a photograph. Faded, creased, but unmistakably real. A young woman standing in front of the very bench Walter sat on every day, her face half-turned, smiling. On the back, written in ink now faded to gray, "Find her before he does." Sarah didn't know what to believe. Was this an elaborate fiction? Some grieving fantasy constructed by an old man trying to make sense of a broken past? Or had she stumbled into the middle of something much bigger? Something buried so deeply that no one had noticed it in years? She tried showing the journal to local authorities, but without a clear crime, they dismissed it as the ramblings of a lonely man. Still, she couldn't let it go. There was too much detail, too many names that checked out, and too many inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. Things took a stranger turn when Sarah went back to the park the next morning. The bag was gone. But not just the bag, Walter too. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't there. No one knew where he'd gone. His apartment was found empty, dishes in the sink, jacket still hanging on the wall. But no sign of him. No signs of struggle. Just absence. Like he had vanished without warning, leaving only the journal behind. That's when Sarah realized she hadn't just found a journal. She had found a breadcrumb trail meant for someone else. Maybe even for her. As she retraced Walter's steps through his entries, she discovered small, eerie coincidences. People in the park who matched vague descriptions in the journal. A gardener who claimed he'd seen Walter arguing with a man in a hooded jacket a few weeks before. A park ranger who remembered Walter getting agitated one day when the city tried to replace the bench. And then there was the red scarf. A single line in the journal referenced it. "When you see the red scarf, you'll know it's begun." Sarah had no idea what it meant. Not until she saw a woman walking her dog 2 days later, wearing the exact scarf described in the journal. Coincidence? Maybe. But the woman's face matched the photograph in the journal. Now the lines between reality and imagination were blurring. Who was this woman? What connection did she have to Walter or Clifford? Was Clifford even real, or a construct of a fractured mind? And why did it feel like Sarah was being watched ever since she started asking questions? The park, once a place of calm, now felt loaded with tension. Every familiar face looked different. Every stranger, a potential suspect. Walter may have vanished, but the story he left behind was just beginning to unravel. And with every entry Sarah read, every piece she tried to fit together, the more she realized she wasn't just reading about the past. She was becoming part of the present. And somewhere out there, someone didn't want her to find the end of the story. Someone who may have been watching that bench all along, and may now be watching her. Sarah was determined to follow the trail Walter had left, but the deeper she dug, the more elusive the truth became. It started with something small. The photograph she had carefully placed between the journal pages went missing. She thought maybe she'd dropped it or misplaced it during her frantic rereading, but after turning her apartment upside down, it was simply gone. No trace. Just an empty gap in the journal where it had been, and a strange chill creeping into her thoughts. She tried to shake it off as carelessness, stress maybe, but something in her gut told her it wasn't just lost. Someone had taken it. And if someone was watching her, they now had the one physical clue that connected the journal to the woman in the park. That photo was proof. Now, without it, she felt exposed and alone. Things began unraveling quickly after that. Her phone rang one night, and when she picked up, no one spoke. Just silence on the other end. Then a click. A blocked number. It happened again 2 nights later, same time, same dead silence. She started wondering if maybe she was getting too obsessed, maybe the story was getting into her head. But then she saw him. Outside her building. A man standing still under the streetlight, not moving, not smoking, just watching. She blinked and he was gone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. But the feeling stayed. That weight of being followed, of being marked. It was as if the moment she picked up Walter's journal, she had entered into something she was never meant to read. Trying to get help only made things worse. She reached out to a local historian, someone who had written about the park's legacy and might know more about Walter's past. The man, friendly over email, agreed to meet for coffee. But when she showed up, he wasn't there. Just a note tucked under a sugar jar at the cafe counter. Stop looking. You're not the first. That was all it said. No signature. Just the implication that others had followed the same trail and never made it to the end. Sarah sat there, the note trembling in her hand, realizing that this wasn't just about uncovering Walter's truth. It was about surviving it. Still, she couldn't walk away. She kept thinking about the bench, the journal, the way Walter had described certain people in the park, cryptically, like he was building a cast of characters in some long-forgotten play. There was the quiet man who feeds the birds, and the mother who counts her steps. They seemed random, like harmless observations, until Sarah realized those same people were still showing up day after day, just as Walter had described. They never spoke to each other, never changed routine, like living loops on a broken reel. And then there was the man with the limp. Walter had only mentioned him once, buried in a section of the journal that was nearly illegible. He knows. He's the reason I can't stop coming. If he speaks, it's over. Sarah began to suspect this man wasn't just a random figure in the park. Maybe he was the reason Walter was always watching. Maybe he was the one Walter had been trying to protect someone from. One afternoon, Sarah followed him. The man with the limp. He always appeared at dusk, walked slowly along the eastern trail, then disappeared past the old public greenhouse. She kept her distance, careful not to draw attention. But halfway down the path, he stopped suddenly, turned, and looked straight at her. Not startled, not confused, just knowing, like he had been waiting for her to follow him. Without a word, he turned back around and vanished behind the greenhouse doors. Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But she pushed forward and stepped through the rusted frame, only to find the place completely empty. No exit. No man. Just the soft creak of old wood and the smell of rotting leaves. That night, she went home shaken and opened the journal again, hoping to find clarity. Instead, she found a page she swore wasn't there before. Different paper. Smoother. Written in ink that hadn't faded like the others. It wasn't Walter's handwriting. It simply read, "You think this started with him?" It didn't. He was just the one who stayed. The weight of those words sank deep. What if Walter had been the last link in a much longer chain? What if the park was more than just a place of memory, but a place of repetition? A trap built on past mistakes, waiting for someone like Sarah to fall into it. And more importantly, who left that note? Because now, she wasn't just tracing Walter's past, someone was manipulating her present. Just when she thought she'd reached a dead end, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. No delivery. No friends in town. She checked the peephole. Empty hallway. But on the floor, a package. No return address. No label. Just her name, written in neat, black pen. She brought it inside, heart racing, hands trembling. Inside was a single item, a second journal. Older. Leather peeling. And this time, it wasn't Walter's. The initials on the first page read CH. Clifford had written one too. And he had been watching long before Walter ever sat on that bench. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the world around her was growing darker with every step she took. She believed, with every ounce of her being, that this was Walter's story, that he had been the one carrying the weight of some tragic secret. But now, with Clifford's journal in her hands, that belief was crumbling. Everything she thought she knew was suddenly under scrutiny. Who was Clifford, and why had he been documenting the same park, the same bench, long before Walter ever showed up? And more importantly, what role had he played in Walter's life? Had he been the one to set everything in motion? Or was he just another pawn in a game far larger than either of them could have imagined? Sarah sat down on her couch, the two journals spread out in front of her, feeling the oppressive weight of the truth she was inching toward. The more she read Clifford's journal, the more disturbing the connections became. Clifford's entries were eerily similar to Walter's. Notes on specific people in the park, cryptic descriptions of events, and references to things that made Sarah's blood run cold. But unlike Walter, Clifford seemed more direct, less cautious, almost like he was daring someone to find him, to expose him. And then she found the entry that shattered everything she thought she knew. It's almost time. She'll come back. And when she does, I'll be ready. No more hiding. She has to see it for herself.
Who was she?
Sarah's mind raced. Was it Eleanor? Had Clifford been somehow involved in her disappearance? Or was she someone else entirely, someone Sarah hadn't even thought of yet? But before she could process any more of the journal, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from her cousin, Megan, the one person she had confided in since all this madness began. She had warned her to stay away from the park, to drop the investigation, but Sarah couldn't stop herself. She had to know the truth. Megan's text was simple, but it hit her like a brick. I got something strange today. Not sure what to make of it. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The sense of unease that had been creeping over her for days surged into full-blown panic. She texted back quickly, trying to remain calm. What do you mean? What did you get? Megan's reply came just moments later, and this time, Sarah could hear the fear in her cousin's words. I got a package, just like the one you got. But it's not for me. It's for you. Before Sarah could respond, Megan's next message came through. They know. They're watching us. A cold sweat broke out on Sarah's skin. She shot out of her seat, panic clawing at her chest. She couldn't wait for Megan to explain. Her cousin didn't send cryptic messages, especially not when they were in danger. Something had shifted. Someone was playing a game, and Sarah was no longer the only one involved. Without thinking, she grabbed the keys to her car and sped over to Megan's apartment. The entire drive felt like an eternity, with every turn of the wheel only heightening her anxiety. She couldn't help but think of Walter, of how he must have felt, walking to that bench day after day, knowing that his life had become something he could no longer control. And now, she too was trapped in that web, pulled deeper and deeper into a mystery she hadn't even begun to understand. When she arrived at Megan's apartment, her cousin was waiting outside, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. She was holding a small, unmarked envelope, the same kind Sarah had received. I don't know how they found me, Megan said, her voice trembling. I didn't even know about the park, Sarah. I didn't know anything about this until now. Sarah grabbed the envelope from her cousin's hand, her fingers trembling as she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, folded in half. When Sarah opened it, her heart nearly stopped. It was a picture of her and Megan from a family reunion, taken years ago, before any of this began. They were standing side by side, laughing, their parents in the background. But what made the photo so chilling wasn't the image itself. It was the figure standing behind them, just barely visible in the background, his face obscured by shadow. But the figure was unmistakable, Walter. Sarah's breath hitched. What was Walter doing in the background of a family photo taken years before she even knew him? And why had someone sent it to Megan, a person who had never even been mentioned in the journals? Was this the sign of something deeper, an entanglement between their families that neither of them could have foreseen? Sarah turned the photograph over, her mind racing. On the back, written in tiny, neat handwriting, were the words, "She's next." Her heart pounded in her chest, and her eyes darted over to Megan, who was now standing a few feet away, her arms crossed protectively around herself. "What does this mean, Sarah? What is happening?" Before Sarah could respond, the distant sound of a car engine hummed in the background. It wasn't a car she recognized, but it was coming closer. Much closer. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she instinctively stepped toward Megan, her hand gripping her cousin's arm. But just as quickly as the engine roared to life, the car suddenly sped past, tires screeching as it turned down a side street and vanished into the night. Sarah's pulse raced.
Who was it?
Had they been watching?
And who were they?
The deeper she got into this twisted puzzle, the more the pieces seemed to be scattered, each new clue raising more questions than answers. And now it wasn't just her who was in danger. Megan was involved too, whether she wanted to be or not. The sense of being watched, of being trapped in something far bigger than she could ever understand, was closing in. And the feeling that they were being followed, manipulated, and controlled became impossible to ignore. But the worst part? Sarah couldn't shake the growing suspicion that the person pulling all the strings had been right in front of her all along. And now, they were closer than ever. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the faceless figure from the photograph stepping out of the shadows and into her room, the soft creak of a floorboard or a passing car outside triggering waves of dread. Her mind raced with every possible explanation, rational and irrational, for how Walter ended up in a decades-old family photo, for how someone could know exactly where Megan lived, and for what they meant by "she's next." She kept telling herself there had to be a reasonable answer, that this was just the work of someone trying to scare her away from the truth. But as the hours passed and dawn broke through the blinds, the pit in her stomach deepened. Something wasn't right. Something had shifted. And whatever game she had stepped into, it had just gotten much more dangerous. By the following afternoon, Megan stopped answering her phone. At first, Sarah told herself it was nothing. Maybe Megan just needed a break. She had every reason to want some space after the envelope, the photo, and the haunting message written on the back. But by evening, when the calls went straight to voicemail and Megan's apartment manager said she hadn't been seen all day, that pit in Sarah's stomach turned into full-blown panic. She drove back to Megan's building, her knuckles white against the steering wheel, her heart pounding against her ribs like a warning she couldn't ignore. The front door was locked. No answer when she buzzed the intercom. No lights on inside. Just silence. And then, something she hadn't noticed before, red chalk markings on the concrete outside the main entrance. Faint, nearly washed away by the previous night's rain, but there. Circles. Lines. An arrow pointing north. It didn't look like a child's drawing. It looked deliberate. Like a message only meant to be seen by someone who knew how to read it. Sarah took a photo, backing away slowly, her breath shaky and short. She wanted to call the police, but what would she even say? That her cousin vanished after they received a journal from a dead man and a threatening photo from an unknown source? That the park she thought was just a backdrop for someone's grief had somehow become a trap, and maybe something far worse? She needed answers, not guesses. And she wasn't getting them sitting in a car watching Megan's apartment windows. She drove straight to the park. The sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows through the trees. Everything looked the same, but it felt different, emptier, quieter, as if the world around her was holding its breath. The bench where Walter once sat now felt like a relic, something sacred and tainted at the same time. She sat, just for a moment, and opened Clifford's journal again. Flipping quickly, she stopped on a page near the back that had stuck slightly to the one beside it. As she peeled them apart, her eyes locked on a word she hadn't seen before. Transfer. Clifford had written, "It happens when the pattern is broken. The transfer begins. The new observer inherits what the last one couldn't carry anymore." Sarah's blood ran cold. Was that what was happening? Had Walter passed something on to her? Had she unknowingly taken on his burden by opening his journal, by stepping into his world? The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Walter's obsession with the bench, his cryptic observations, the people who never changed, all of it felt like a cycle. And now she was trapped inside it. A sudden movement to her left snapped her out of her thoughts. A figure, standing near the edge of the path. Same man she'd seen before. The one with the limp. Only this time he wasn't walking away. He was watching her.
Still.
Silent. Sarah stood slowly. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to bolt. But the man didn't move. Not until she took a step toward him. Then he turned his head, almost robotically, and looked past her shoulder. Instinctively, she turned to see what he was looking at. No one was there. When she looked back, he was gone. That night, she found something shoved under her front door. A torn page, this time from her own journal. A page she didn't remember writing. But the handwriting was unmistakably hers. Her words, her style, the ink she used when she journaled late at night. But the words were not ones she remembered putting on paper. The watcher must remain. The pattern must hold. The cost of walking away is always paid in blood. She read the line over and over again, her breath caught in her throat. Who had written it? Or worse, had she written it herself and forgotten? Had the park done something to her? Was this what happened to Walter? Was it happening to Megan now? As she stared at the page, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Helplessness. This wasn't just about uncovering a hidden story anymore. It wasn't about solving a mystery or bringing justice to a man lost in grief. It was about survival. About holding onto what little sanity she had left while everything around her blurred between reality and something far more twisted. Sarah looked out her window that night and saw the streetlight flicker. Beneath it stood a woman she didn't recognize. Pale, barefoot, staring straight up at her window. Not moving, just watching. And in that moment, Sarah realized something she had been too afraid to admit until now. She wasn't just following someone else's story anymore. She was the story. And someone, maybe something, was waiting for her next move. Sarah didn't know why she drove back to the park that night. Something inside her, call it instinct, fear, desperation, told her there was still something there she had missed, some final piece buried beneath the layers of grief, paranoia, and half-truths. The city was quiet, heavy with that eerie stillness that settles in just before something breaks. She parked along the curb where the trees thinned out, and the bench where it all began, sat in the amber glow of a flickering lamp. It was empty, but it didn't feel unoccupied. It felt watched. Every step toward it made her skin crawl, like the ground beneath her feet was remembering every secret it had been forced to swallow. She sat, heart pounding, eyes scanning the surrounding dark. She took out both journals, Walter's and Clifford's, and laid them side by side on her lap, flipping pages in a frantic rhythm she couldn't quite explain. Then something odd caught her eye. A symbol, nothing fancy, just a circle with a line drawn through it diagonally, was scribbled in the corner of a page from Walter's journal. She'd seen it before, but thought it was just a doodle. But now she realized it appeared in both journals, always on pages that described the pattern. She grabbed her phone, opened the photos she had taken of the chalk markings outside Megan's apartment. The same circle with the line through it. Her fingers trembled. It wasn't a random symbol. It was a marker. And then, suddenly, someone sat down beside her. She jumped, heart slamming against her ribs, but when she turned, she froze. It was Eleanor. Or at least, that's who it looked like. Same gray eyes, same quiet grace, but this Eleanor was older.
Worn.
Changed. Before Sarah could even speak, the woman whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." Her voice wasn't threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. "You've gone too far. You opened what was meant to stay closed." Sarah could barely breathe. "You're alive," she managed to say, her voice brittle. "Everyone said you were." "Missing?" Eleanor finished, glancing out at the trees. "That was the point. I had to disappear."
For them.
For him. Sarah stared, confusion crashing over her. For who? Walter?
What are you talking about?
Eleanor turned slowly toward her, and the streetlight caught her face. There were old scars there, subtle but deep. Walter was never grieving me. He was hiding me.
Protecting me.
From them. Sarah's world tilted. Them? But Eleanor didn't answer right away. She reached into her coat and pulled out a faded, time-stained photo, one Sarah had never seen before. It showed a group of people, all sitting on the same bench at different points in time. In every image, the faces changed, but one figure remained the same. In the shadows. Blurred, always watching. Always present. The Watchers, Eleanor said. They're not people. Not exactly. They're part of the park. They keep the pattern in place. Walter, he found out what they were doing. He tried to expose it through the journal, but it doesn't work like that. The more people know, the deeper the grip becomes. It doesn't free you. It consumes you. Sarah stared at her, speechless. The Watchers. That man with the limp. The barefoot woman beneath her window. They weren't stalking her in the way she thought. They were guarding something. Keeping her within bounds. Maintaining the pattern. And then it hit her, Clifford's phrase, the new observer inherits what the last one couldn't carry. Walter didn't pass a mystery onto her. He passed a curse. You were meant to find the journal, Eleanor said softly. But not to solve anything. The park needed a new anchor. Walter was failing. You were chosen. Sarah's mind reeled. This wasn't just a story about a grieving old man. It wasn't about a missing woman or a mysterious park. It was something much older, something deeper. A cycle. A system that operated just outside the line of human understanding. And she had stumbled straight into its heart. And just when she thought it couldn't get any more surreal, Eleanor leaned closer, eyes locked onto hers. There's one more thing. One more person. He's still alive, and he's been guiding all of this from the beginning. Sarah blinked. Who? Eleanor hesitated, and then whispered a name that made Sarah feel like the air had been sucked from her lungs. Clifford. No, Sarah gasped.
He died.
That's what Walter wrote. He. The word chosen made Sarah's stomach turn. I didn't ask for this. Eleanor looked at her with something that resembled pity. None of us do. Sarah tried to stand, but her legs felt like they were buried in concrete. So, what now? What am I supposed to do? Just sit here until I fade like Walter. Watch people until I disappear. But Eleanor shook her head slowly. You've already made the pattern unstable. You involved Megan. You dug into Clifford. You saw the Watchers. That's why the rules are changing. Why they've gotten more aggressive. Walter believed he died. Eleanor interrupted. But Clifford never left. He's the one who started the Watchers. He created the pattern. Sarah's hands went cold. Everything she'd been through, everything she thought she was unraveling, it had all been engineered. Not by some tragic mistake or a grieving widower, but by someone alive, someone still out there, someone watching. Clifford wasn't a casualty of the story. He was the architect. And now, she had walked right into the very world he designed. And he knew she was coming. Sarah sat in her car outside Megan's apartment building, the engine idling softly beneath the weight of her thoughts, but the weight inside her chest was anything but soft. The name Eleanor had whispered hours earlier, Clifford, was still echoing in her skull, warping everything she thought she understood. Clifford wasn't just some curious neighbor who kept a journal. He was the beginning, the engineer of the entire system she had unknowingly stepped into. If he was still alive, it meant someone out there had been playing her from the very first moment she cracked open Walter's worn notebook. And now, with Megan still missing and the Watchers growing more aggressive, Sarah knew she didn't have the luxury of pretending she could walk away. The only question was, how much was she willing to sacrifice for the truth? She had to go back to the one person who might know more than she ever let on. Her mother. It was a gut punch to admit, but certain details from earlier were starting to feel off. The way her mom had reacted when she first mentioned Walter, the vague avoidance when Sarah brought up Eleanor's name, the offhand remark about Clifford being just a neighbor. Too flat. Too rehearsed. And now, with everything she discovered, Sarah couldn't shake the sense that her mother had known more than she was willing to admit. She drove straight to her childhood home, every memory of that quiet suburban house now colored with doubt and suspicion. Her mother answered the door in her usual soft cardigan, her smile familiar, but not comforting anymore. As Sarah stepped inside, The air felt colder, heavier, like it knew what was about to be unearthed. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said, skipping the pleasantries. "And I need you to tell me the truth. No filters. No comforting lies." Her mother's smile faded. "Of course. What is it? Who is Clifford really?" The silence that followed didn't last long, but it was long enough for Sarah to see the panic flash across her mother's face, a micro-expression she would have missed before. Her mother slowly closed the door behind them, then moved to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where Sarah once colored drawings and did homework. Everything felt tainted now. "You were just a child," her mother finally said, eyes distant. "I thought it would never touch you." Sarah's heart thudded. "So it is true." Her mother nodded faintly. "Clifford wasn't just Walter's friend. He was your father's college roommate. Brilliant. Disturbed. He believed places could remember things, hold patterns. That consciousness could attach to locations, evolve, replicate. He was obsessed with that park. Said it was a conduit, a perfect vessel. When he disappeared, we all assumed the worst. Walter took it hard. Blamed himself. But Clifford wasn't gone. He just slipped underground." Sarah was trembling now. "So all of this, the journals, the watchers, Megan, he's behind it?" Her mother's lips tightened. "If you're seeing signs, it means you've been chosen. The pattern has recognized you. And once that happens, there are only two options: carry it or pass it. But passing it comes at a cost." "What cost?" Her mother looked directly at her, the mask finally gone. "A life. One observer must replace another. That's how the cycle resets. That's how your father—" She stopped, but the implications slammed into Sarah like a tidal wave.
No.
"Dad died in an accident." Her mother shook her head slowly.
No, sweetheart.
"He tried to pass it to Clifford, tried to reset the pattern. Clifford refused. So it took him instead." Sarah's world shattered. Everything she had believed about her family, about the story she was told, crumbled in seconds. Her father hadn't just died, he'd been taken. Consumed by the same system now hunting her. And that's when her mother offered an impossible choice. "You can give it to someone else," she said. "That's why it was passed to you. You're not stuck yet. But someone else has to take your place. Someone the park will accept. Someone close. Megan could be that person." Sarah stared at her mother in horror. "You want me to sacrifice Megan? She's my cousin. She's already been exposed. The watchers are already circling her. You just have to stop resisting. Let it shift." The words felt like poison. Sarah couldn't breathe that IT was the oldest story in the world, survival at the expense of someone else. But now it wasn't abstract. It was real.
Raw.
Personal. And it made her feel sick. As Sarah stumbled out of the house, her mother calling after her in a voice too calm for the hell she had just unleashed, the full gravity of her situation sank in. She was trapped in something far older and more calculated than she ever imagined. The truth wasn't just painful, it was brutal. And now she had to choose: let the watchers take Megan, or keep carrying this unbearable weight until it inevitably crushed her too. But as she reached her car, she saw something new. Folded beneath the windshield wiper was a single page torn from a book she didn't recognize. The handwriting wasn't Walter's. It wasn't Clifford's. It was hers. It read, "If you hesitate, they decide for you." Sarah's hands shook. Someone, or something, was accelerating the timeline. The pattern was shifting. She was running out of time. And no matter what she chose next, someone was going to pay. The rain hit the windshield like static, a relentless clatter that kept Sarah from hearing her own heartbeat, which was probably a blessing. Her mind was unraveling faster than she could process, every truth peeling back to reveal another hidden layer she didn't ask for. The message left under her wiper blade had been written in her own handwriting, but she had no memory of writing it. That meant one of two things. Either she was losing her grip on reality, or someone had access to her thoughts. Neither possibility was comforting. She clutched the paper tighter as her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but the content turned her blood to ice. It was a photo. Megan, tied to a chair in what looked like the basement of an old house. Her face was bruised, her eyes terrified. Beneath it, a simple text: "Choose by midnight." Sarah drove blindly, barely aware of the streets passing beneath her. The air felt tighter now, as if the entire city were leaning in, waiting for her to make a move. She didn't know where she was going until she realized she'd pulled into the parking lot behind the library, the place where Clifford used to meet Walter all those years ago. Somewhere in her gut, she knew that if any trace of Clifford remained, this was where it would surface. As she stepped into the building, the lights overhead flickered, and a strange cold followed her through the doors. The librarian on duty looked up and gave her a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah had never seen her before, but something about her face felt familiar. "I've been expecting you," the woman said, motioning to a side door Sarah hadn't noticed before. "He left something for you. Said you'd come when it was time." Sarah followed numbly, her instincts screaming that this was wrong, but she couldn't stop now. Not with Megan in danger. Not with the clock ticking down towards some horrible fate she didn't fully understand. The woman led her into a back room where shelves were packed with old documents, sealed boxes, and cassette tapes labeled with names and dates. One caught her eye immediately, her father's name, dated 2 months before his death. She grabbed it, and the woman handed her a dusty recorder, without a word. Sarah hit play. Her father's voice crackled through the speaker, worn, frantic. "If you're hearing this, they've gotten to you too. Clifford was never alone. There's an entire network, doctors, city officials, librarians, teachers, all part of it. They keep the pattern in motion, and the rest of us, we're just the pieces. The observers. We inherit roles like it's theater, and if we fail to play our part, we disappear. Not just physically, our histories get erased. I've watched people vanish from memory, from records, like they never existed. They call it pattern erasure. Clifford found a way to manipulate it, to position himself as a central node. That's why the Watchers listened to him. He created this reality." Sarah dropped the tape player. Her hands were shaking, her pulse roaring in her ears. This wasn't about her or Walter, or even Megan. It was bigger, institutional, entirely fabricated lives built around an invisible framework, and she had been stitched into it like a marionette, unknowingly acting out a script Clifford had written decades ago. The librarian was watching her closely now, and her face was no longer warm. It was hollow. "They told me to keep you here if you figured it out," she said. "But I liked your father. I won't stop you. But they're coming. And you won't get another chance." Sarah ran. Outside, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a live stream, Megan, eyes wide, mouthing something urgently. Behind her, a figure stepped into frame, only partially lit. Sarah knew that face from Walter's photo album. Clifford. He looked straight into the camera, into her.
"Tick-tock, Sarah.
It ends tonight. Bring the journal, or she dies." Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the parking lot, soaked by the downpour, every nerve screaming. She'd trusted the journals, believed in Walter, doubted herself, and suspected strangers, but now it was clear. This wasn't a puzzle she was meant to solve. It was a trap she was born into. And the worst part? Someone had helped build it from the inside. As she opened her contacts to call someone, anyone, her screen lit up with a name she never expected. Megan's boyfriend. Ryan. The guy who had kept quiet. Who'd said he barely knew anything. Who hadn't returned her last few calls. She hesitated, then scrolled down and tapped messages. That's when she saw it. A deleted thread. A message string marked archived. It was between Ryan and someone labeled simply C. She tapped. The last message. "She's almost there. You'll have what you need by midnight." Sarah dropped the phone. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had felt before, not just because someone she trusted had lied, but because it meant the Watchers weren't just an ancient force or a secret network. They were intimate, personal. They knew who to use, who to place close, who to make her trust. She looked up at the night sky, her fists clenched at her sides. There were too many lies, too many missing people, too many lives lost in the name of order and patterns and rules no one ever agreed to. And now, she had less than 3 hours to make a choice that could either end it or bind her to it forever. But the truth was clear. She wasn't a piece on their board anymore. She was ready to flip the entire game. The park was nearly empty by the time Sarah arrived, its winding paths blanketed in fog, the benches shrouded in silence, like ghosts frozen in thought. Streetlights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to slither with intent. She clutched Walter's journal under her coat, her pulse thudding in her throat. Each step weighted with everything she now knew about her father, Clifford, the Watchers, the pattern, and the brutal system designed to feed off chosen observers like her. Midnight was minutes away, and the park felt like it was holding its breath. Megan's life, her own freedom, were about to hinge on whatever happened next. But as Sarah stepped past the old sycamore tree where Walter always sat, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The bench wasn't empty. Clifford was already there, seated like he'd never left, like he belonged to the bench more than the wood and metal itself. He looked older than she expected, but not frail. His eyes were too alive, too alert, watching her every move as if this moment had been planned long before she was born. He gestured to the seat beside him without speaking, and for a second, it felt like time bent around them. She sat down slowly, knees trembling, throat dry. "You brought it," he said quietly, nodding toward the journal. Sarah didn't answer. She kept her eyes on him, trying to read the lines of his face, searching for cracks in his calm. "Where's Megan?" she asked. "She's alive.
For now.
But whether she stays that way depends entirely on what you do next." He leaned back, exhaling like they were old friends catching up, not adversaries in a deadly game. "You think I'm the villain here, don't you?" She didn't answer, but her silence was loud enough. "I was chosen too," he said. "A long time ago. I tried to fight it, tried to understand the pattern. And when I did, I realized something horrifying. The system doesn't feed on pain. It feeds on observance. The moment you start watching, documenting, writing it down, it becomes real. That's why the journals matter. That's why you matter. You're the final link. You complete the narrative." Sarah's grip tightened around the book. "So what? You just decided to trap people? Use lives to keep your precious system alive?" Clifford's smile thinned. It was either that or chaos. People vanishing, timelines collapsing, memories dissolving. "I tried to build order. Someone had to be the anchor." "You chose to be the anchor," she snapped. "You made people disappear. You watched my father die." "No," Clifford said. "Your father chose. I just didn't stop him." Sarah's heart pounded harder, the fog around them beginning to thicken like smoke. The Watchers were close. She could feel them pressing in, just beyond sight, just beyond sound. Clifford reached into his coat and pulled out a small, square object wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, she gasped. It was her father's old voice recorder, its tape spinning slowly, faint static leaking from the speaker. "You want the truth?" Clifford said. "Listen." Sarah hesitated, then leaned in. Her father's voice came through again, weaker this time, almost broken. "If you're hearing this, it means Clifford told you the truth. But there's one thing he won't admit. He isn't in control. He thinks he is, but the pattern is bigger than all of us.
He was just the first to understand it.
The Watchers don't need us. They use us to anchor themselves. And if you're brave enough, you can erase the pattern. But it requires the anchor to let go." Sarah stared at Clifford. He didn't look surprised. "He thought if I died, the pattern would collapse," Clifford said. "But he was wrong. There's always another anchor. And right now it's you." The weight of it crushed her. The entire story, the missing people, the false memories, the distorted lives, all of it existed because someone kept feeding the pattern. And now, with Walter gone, her father gone, and Megan on the edge, the decision had landed in her hands. "You can't kill it," Clifford said. "But you can shape it. With the journal. If you write her out, just one paragraph, it'll let her go. It'll take you instead. Or you can write me out. Let the pattern reset. Risk whatever comes next." Sarah felt the journal grow heavier in her hands. Her mind spun with every voice, every page. every choice that had led her here. If she wrote Megan out, she would save her, but lose herself. If she wrote Clifford out, she might destroy the last piece of structure holding the pattern in place. But maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Then a new voice whispered behind her ear, not Clifford's. It was Megan's.
Clear. Real. Don't do it, she said.
Sarah turned, stunned, and there Megan stood, unbound, unharmed, tears on her cheeks, but very much alive. It's already done. Clifford stood too, confused now. What? How? Megan held up another journal, Sarah's original one. The one she thought she lost. I wrote the ending, Megan said softly. I wrote you out. I figured out the pattern too. It doesn't care who writes. It just obeys the strongest observer. The ground beneath the bench shuddered. Clifford screamed, not in fear, but in sheer disbelief, as his form began to blur, bend, and dissipate into the mist like a sketch being erased from paper. His screams echoed into the trees, into the fog, until they were nothing but static in the wind. And then it was silent. The bench was empty. Sarah collapsed to her knees, Megan pulling her into a trembling hug. The watchers had vanished. The fog was lifting. And the journal in Sarah's hand, blank. Pages wiped clean. But as they turned to leave the park, the final twist revealed itself. On the nearest tree, etched freshly into the bark, was a line neither of them wrote. It read, "A story never ends. It waits." And just like that, the wind picked up, and the watchers began again. Weeks passed, and life began to resemble something close to normal for Sarah, at least what normal could mean after unraveling a supernatural conspiracy that spanned generations. The fog that used to creep into the park every evening seemed thinner now, less alive. The watchers, those silent sentinels she once felt breathing down her neck, were gone, or maybe just quiet. Either way, she no longer felt their eyes. Megan moved back in with her, returning to school, though she was quieter now, more contemplative. They didn't talk about the journal or the night in the park, not directly. But sometimes, late at night, Sarah would catch her sister staring out the window, watching the wind rustle through the trees as if waiting for something. The journal stayed locked in a wooden box under Sarah's bed, pages still blank. She checked it once a day. Not because she wanted to see new writing, but because she needed to make sure there wasn't any. That the story really had ended. Sarah had returned to the bench just once since Clifford vanished. She sat there in silence, watching the world move around her. Joggers. Dog walkers. Children chasing one another in bursts of laughter. And for a while, she just breathed. That moment was the first time in months she didn't feel like a character in someone else's story. She finally understood what Walter must have been chasing with all those journal entries. Not control, not understanding, but peace. Just a place where the world made sense for a little while, and he could pretend he wasn't being watched. Maybe that's what all of them had been trying to find in their own way. Walter, Clifford, even her father. Not the truth, but stillness. And yet, something still lingered. One evening, Sarah received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an aerial view of the park, taken from high above, marked with a red circle around the bench. Beneath it was a short note written in careful, typed letters. There are more anchors. You've only cut one thread. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the photo and returned it to the envelope. She burned it in the sink that night, watching the edges curl and blacken under the flame, but she couldn't burn what it meant. The watchers may have been silenced, but they were not gone. The story wasn't finished. Not really. It never would be. As long as someone was watching, documenting, there would always be another anchor waiting to take root. That realization didn't bring fear this time, only clarity. Sarah began journaling again, but not in the same way. Her new notebook was filled with sketches, grocery lists, bits of poetry, memories of her mother's laugh and her sister's first steps. It was her story now, and if something or someone out there still needed an observer, they'd get the version she chose to tell. No more mysteries. No more shadows. Just life. Messy, beautiful, unpredictable life. She even started volunteering at a local community center, helping others who felt like they didn't belong anywhere. Sometimes people would tell her they felt like they were being watched, like they didn't quite exist in their own lives. And Sarah would smile softly, listening closely, never dismissing their fears. Because once upon a time, she felt the same way. She still did, just differently. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning, as the sun broke through the trees and lit the path to the park in golden shards, Sarah returned to the bench once more. A little girl was sitting there with her grandmother, feeding pigeons, laughing in a way that rang so clear and perfect it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. For a second, she saw Walter again, just a glimpse, standing nearby, nodding at her, before vanishing into the morning light. She sat down one last time, not to write, not to investigate, but just to be. The wind moved through the leaves, gentle and aimless. Somewhere, the watchers might have stirred. But this time, Sarah didn't care. Because in the end, she had learned the most important truth of all. The story isn't what watches us. We decide what gets written. And sometimes, the most powerful ending is simply choosing not to tell it.